Welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and we are having our monthly check-in with Ed Sealover. Denver Business Journal is where you work, and you have a new weekly series that you're publishing called Capital Business Preview. And part of the reason why we meet with you every month is to talk about this Capital Business Preview, essentially what business owners, leaders, people need to know coming from the Senate legislation, what's going on there and how that's going to impact business in Colorado.
And there's a lot that the Senate and the House are doing this year in Colorado that's going to affect them, certainly.
Yes, absolutely. We will definitely talk about oil and gas and save that for the end, because that happens to be the biggest one.
Let's keep the cliffhanger on there, yes.
Yes, stay with us. I definitely want to get into this minimum wage.
Yes,
increase.
yes. House Bill 1210, a bill that has passed the House and is waiting for its first committee hearing in the Senate, essentially says that local governments can, if they choose, raise their minimum wages above the state's level. The state minimum wage is going to go up to $12 an hour come January 1st, and will rise by inflation after that. But the proponents of this bill say it's not enough. If you're living in a city like an Aspen or a Vail or closer to home here, somewhere like a Denver or a Boulder, making minimum wage is not going to get by for you. And they feel like city leaders should be able to reflect the needs of their population and require businesses to raise their wages. Now, of course, businesses have not taken this well. And it's not just because a lot of them are ambivalent about raising wages. In fact, the restaurant industry is one of the primary opponents of this bill. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a restaurant job in Colorado, in the Front Range, that pays minimum wage right now because there's such competition for workers. They can't even touch a salary that low. That said, it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare, business leaders are saying. If you have a multi-location company, you may want to send someone to work in your Aurora restaurant for the day, and the Aurora restaurant may have different wages than, say, your Denver restaurant or your Denver shop versus your Lakewood shop, something along those lines, even to the point where there's been a lot of concerns about home health care nurses. These are people who work for a home health care agency, drive around all day to treat people in their homes. So are they getting paid different wages for every one of the 6 stops they go to if there are 6 different cities that they're involved in? These are the kind of questions that are out there from businesses. There's also a concern that this is going to lead to a migration of workers away from lower wage areas, which we're already seeing from, say, the La Juntas, the Pueblos, areas like that, to higher wage areas like Denver, which is going to make it just that much harder to operate a business in a city like Pueblo or La Junta that still needs to offer employment to people. So, there are a lot of questions around this. I think certainly this bill is on a fast track to Governor Polis's desk. It is interesting, though, that it passed the House over a week ago, about 2 weeks ago by the time this show will air, and we have yet to see it calendared in the Senate. So I don't know if that just means they're putting off some of these bills while they debate the budget this week in the Senate, or if there really are some questions coming out of Senate members that could lead to some fights or possibly some amendments on this bill.
Yes. I definitely am curious to see how this one's going to go. Obviously, as you mentioned, businesses are opposing it, particularly in the hospitality industry, restaurants.
Yes.
Leads me to, because we are looking at local governments being governed on that, I want to talk about sales tax.
Yes, yes.
So this is a bright side. This is, I think we're seeing some real solutions here, and I'm excited for this to go through.
This may be the single biggest business win of the 2019 session. A lot of small businesses were rightly concerned in September when the state, following a U.S. Supreme Court decision, ruled that, yes, if you're an out-of-state business that sells products into the state, think Amazon, you have to start paying sales tax to local governments on this. That didn't worry local businesses. Everyone was happy about that. In fact, large businesses particularly felt it evened the competition a little bit. What small businesses worried about was that for large out-of-state businesses, the Department of Revenue ruled you had to make $100,000 worth of sales into this state in order to pay taxes on what's called destination sourcing, which is you pay to the city of Denver, you pay to the city of Colorado Springs, you pay to each of the individual taxing districts to which you ship this. The state had no de minimis exemption for in-state businesses. So basically, in-state businesses were required to pay to every district based on the location of their shipment. Now, the problem is that not only do we have 71 home rule cities that collect their own sales tax, with the overlap of cities, counties, and special districts in the state, there are roughly 700 different taxing districts. And for an Amazon to figure out how to deal with that, and actually an Amazon can afford to buy one of a couple of computer programs that are out there that will tell you exactly what the tax rate is for every address in the state of Colorado. For a small business to figure out that rate was terrifying to a lot of small businesses. They say, if we're going to do this by hand, it's going to take up a third of our time every month. If we're required to buy these very expensive programs, that's going to be a big hit to all kinds of small businesses. The Department of Revenue in December put off until May 31st the deadline for businesses to comply with this, and the thought was maybe the legislature can come up with something. For the first 2 months of the legislature came up with batting away bills that tried to do things. But finally, after all that, we've seen a bill come out, and it passed through its first committee this week unanimously, House Bill 1240, and the bill essentially says that in-state companies do not have to follow destination sourcing. They can follow origin sourcing, which is I'm going to pay taxes based on where I'm shipping from, not where each package is going to, until the state comes up with a system that they can easily input a location, find out the taxing rate there, and not only do that, but pay the state for that taxing rate and have the state disperse those taxes to the various municipalities and special districts and whatnot. And so it was a great compromise solution. It looks like it's going to put off the biggest fear of small businesses, that they were going to be regulated to death or that they would have to almost go underground to avoid paying any taxes whatsoever. And this is running simultaneously with a bill, Senate Bill 6, that requires the state to come up with the said system that I mentioned there, where you can plug in their address and figure out what the tax rate is and pay to the state. So this was a big worry for small businesses. It looks like it is not a worry at this point.
Which is awesome. And again, noting that it passed unanimously the first.
Passed unanimously for the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee. That doesn't mean there can't be hiccups. Usually when you see that, there aren't hiccups, however.
Yes. I didn't even know we could vote unanimously.
In this session, it's a rarity.
Yes, absolutely. So another controversial one that I want to talk about, and we'll talk about both healthcare and paid family leave. But let's focus on healthcare here. House Bills 1001 and 1010.
Yes, there are a number of healthcare bills that are going through. Some are controversial, some are not. House Bill 1001 was signed into law this week by Governor Jared Polis. It's a bill that actually we found some rare middle ground on. It requires hospitals to open up their books, even private hospitals, in a way they never have before, so the state can examine their costs, what they're spending money on, how much they're charging for things, and use that information not just for information's sake, but to determine, is there a way to reform state payments or state policies that can bring down the ever-rising costs of healthcare in hospitals in this state. Some hospitals are charging 7 to 8 times what Medicare reimburses for common procedures, and both insurers and employers in the state says this is too much. We've got to bring it down somehow. That is a big part of Governor Jared Polis's healthcare agenda. House Bill 1010, probably a little smaller part. It sets up new regulations for freestanding emergency rooms, which are some of the biggest cost drivers. These are the places that look like urgent care clinics that people might go into to treat a bee sting and get a $1,000 bill from it. They've received a lot of backlash. This is really going to allow the state to crack down a little bit more and in the future set up regulations on what they can charge versus emergency rooms. That's also going through pretty bipartisanly. We have a third bill that's going through pretty pretty bipartisanly, that regulates a practice that's now known as surprise billing, where you go into the hospital for a surgery. You think that hospital is part of your insurance network. You suddenly get a bill 3 months later for tens of thousands of dollars from a surgeon or even a surgical assistant who happens to not be in network, and you didn't know about this beforehand. Basically, this would allow the state to limit what those people can charge to both insurers and to individuals. It's gotten some pushback from some doctors groups, but this is going through way bipartisanly. It passed the House 60-4 earlier this week, and is now going on to the Senate. Well, the flashpoint, however, in healthcare is on the reinsurance bill, House Bill 1168. This is a bill that sets up a reinsurance pool that basically says for the highest cost episode, say $20,000 or more, a big surgery, treating someone from a horrible accident, insurers can actually turn those over to the state after they reach a certain threshold, maybe about $20,000 in costs. And this reinsurance pool that is funded and run through the state will pick up the rest of those costs up to, say, $1 million or so. The problem is that the idea of how to fund this is the state coming in and limiting what hospitals can charge to individually insured patients. And this is something that's never been done before. This is not how there are 7 existing reinsurance programs across America. None of them fund their programs this way. And the hospitals are saying, look, we're willing to go along with this. We're willing to pay some of the bill, but this puts all of the burden on us. Not only that, it's the first instance in which they can look at a state pointing to an industry and saying, we are going to cap what you can charge people right now. Don't forget, this is a state that doesn't allow rent control, for example. And they say, look, if we're going to be capped on what we can receive for some of these services, hospitals simply won't offer some of these services, and they'll be the higher end services, things like trauma care that people need. Now, this is made some state officials apoplectic when they hear things like that. They say the hospitals better not do that. But it's really, there's no middle ground right now in terms of, I think everybody agrees the insurance program is not a bad idea. And last year it was a bill that ran that put a fee on every insurance premium in the state to help pay for this pool, which drove businesses nuts because they said, why should I have to pay for individuals to help control their costs? The idea of the reinsurance pool, by the way, will also be that it would bring down individual policy costs between 10 and 20%.
Wow.
But right now, nobody can get on the same page about how to pay for this, and there's going to be quite some discussion about the role of the state in limiting what a certain industry can charge, which it's never done before.
Wow. That's awesome to hear. Moving on to paid family leave. Now, this one is definitely giving headaches all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I would put this as the number 2 thorn in business's side in this session, right behind oil and gas right now. The paid family leave bill essentially sets up a statewide insurance program by which all workers at all public and private employers could dip into if they need to take as much as 12 to 16 weeks off to care for a new baby, to care for a loved one or their own illness, or to deal with military relocation problems. And the idea of this bill, which is also slightly different from previous iterations, is that employers and employees would pay equally into this pool to set up this pool. But then the state would run it, and the state would actually be the one that determines whether an employee who applies to take leave would be able to take leave, not the employer. The employer would have to have that position open and ready for the person when they get back. There are no exemptions for size on this, so if you're an employer of 2 people and one of them needs to take this leave, you've got to go along with it. Businesses say not only is it going to be expensive for them to help fund it, it's going to be duplicative. A number of businesses right now already offer some sort of paid leave to employees. The estimates vary wildly. Opponents say it's just 12% of employees in the state that have access to it. Proponents say that's of the bill say that. Opponents of the bill, businesses say, look, surveyed members, and 80% of them offer some sort of paid leave, maybe not this exact leave. And businesses say it just ties our hands. Instead of letting us deal with employees on an individual basis when they need to take time off, this puts in a one-size-fits-all system that that may not work the same for a 3-person company as for Walmart. And so they are fighting hard not to kill the bill, but to make major changes to this bill. Changes on everything from allowing companies that currently offer some sort of paid leave program to keep it under the bill. There's no exemption. So if you have a program, you still have to pay as much as anybody who doesn't. And that's basically telling companies, get rid of your program, even if it might be better than what we're offering in terms of repaying 50 to 90% of the wages that an employee may get when they're out. The other thing is businesses are really worried about the definition of family in here. The definition of family includes, and I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but it's anyone who you feel a very close bond with, like a family member. It doesn't have to be a parent, a child, a grandparent. You could roll anything out there. Proponents of the bill say, look, in other states this has not been abused. Businesses are a bit more skeptical of the fact that this could be abused. It has gotten out of its first Senate committee, but it's a little dragging in its second one, where a vote was postponed while Democrats are working on potential amendments possibly in opposition to the wishes of the Democratic sponsors of this bill. So there could be a little bit of a throwdown here to see what goes too far and what is a good idea to be included in this bill. Rest assured, though, businesses will be looking at this very closely as it keeps going through.
And this is a bill that has died several times before.
This is a bill that has died 4 times in the past 5 sessions, including in 2014. It died in the Democratic-controlled Senate because there were a number of people that thought it went too far. It's been changed over the years, and I think 6 or 7 other states have some sort of paid leave program in right now. But a lot of folks just say, look, this is not the way to go about this.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we get something out of it.
Absolutely. And again, I should mention, too, so it's not just the business side here. I mean, proponents also will point out things like, hey, if you offer paid leave, employee retention goes way up. Even, the health of the baby goes way up if someone gets more than 2 weeks to be at home with a new child. And they say it's time for businesses to kind of put up with this. Businesses are willing to say, look, we'll go along with the general idea that paid family leave should be offered. It's just the details in which they're miles apart right now.
Yes. Details, that's where the key is.
Yes.
I want to talk about affordable housing.
Yeah, there's a number of affordable housing measures that are going through right now, and affordable housing is something that employers are concerned about deeply because it's hard to find places for your workers to live. Now, a lot of these aren't seemingly directly affordable housing measures. There is one to expand the low-income tax credit that goes to developers of affordable housing that could directly lead to more affordable housing. But other ones are measures that do things like require landlords to give 3 days before they evict someone for a non-criminal violation, essentially, or that they require landlords to charge application fees that are no greater than the cost to process the background check on the person who's applying. And the idea Democrats say behind these is that they know they can't solve all the affordable housing problems here, particularly as our costs of living continue to go up. But they say they can protect people who are currently in more affordable housing from being thrown out and having a very difficult time of how to go about finding housing. There's been some interesting conversation, particularly Representative Rod Bockenfeld in the House, who is an Adams County representative, an Adams County Republican, and is a landlord. He actually has several landlords, and he has spoken for what he says are other landlords, saying, look, if we continue to be regulated in this way, we're going to sell our houses for market value, and then the people that you're trying to protect will have even fewer options of where to live because affordable housing will go on the non-affordable market out there. So there's a lot of questions about that. The biggest one that is set to come up on April 1st, though, is an interesting bill that would cap vendor fees. These are the fees that employers companies get to keep 3.3% of their sales tax revenues if they calculate and send in their sales taxes. Basically, so the state doesn't have to calculate them. They trust the companies, and then the companies, the reward, get to keep them. This would say, we're going to go away, or we're going to cap vendor fees, and it's largely focused on the biggest vendors. Think Walmart, someone like that, where they can't keep more than a certain amount a month, and all the money that we make from that cap is going to go to an affordable housing fund. I imagine this is where the battles have already been pretty significant on these. This is where they really get up there, as you're getting big business versus big plans for affordable housing, and the question, again, of what is the government's role in the affordable housing crisis?
Oh, gosh. That one's going to be one to untangle for sure.
Yes.
Now, I didn't know about this car sharing until I read your article that came out on the 25th, this Monday. So Senate Bill 90.
Yes.
Yeah. So it deals with commercial liability insurance and safety requirements, but does not require fees to be paid that rental car companies are paying.
Yeah, the issue here is when we talk about car sharing, this is not Uber and Lyft. This is companies like Turo that serve as marketplaces for people who own their own cars, or leasing their own cars, and decide that when they're not driving them, they essentially want to put them up to be rental cars, that they'll put them on this platform, and people can say, I need to get around the city for 3 days. I'll come pick up your car and use it and get around. People can make money from that. Rental car companies are not happy about these programs.
Weird.
Because these programs, the people who own these, are not paying the same fees. They don't have to pay airport fees, even when they pick up cars at the airport. They don't have to pay a number of the fees that are hit upon rental car companies. And rental car companies, particularly Enterprise, which is taking the lead in this, say, look, we're amenable to regulating and allowing these services to keep going on, but we're being put at a 13 or 14% disadvantage right now because of the amount of regulation and fees we have. Let's just bring them up to the level playing field. These other companies are saying that's bogus. We are not rental car companies. These are people who are making a couple $100 a month off of these things. They note that rental car companies don't have to pay, say, sales tax on their cars when they add them into their fleet, although they do have to certainly pay a lot of taxes back after that. And they say, and this is maybe the key to this, they say we're a disruptive industry, and traditional industries are trying to stop us from growing by putting us under the same rules as they have had. We've dealt with this before. A couple years ago, there were a number of regulations on Uber and Lyft that the legislature passed. Even 2 years ago, there was a fight over how to regulate and license people who get onto dog walking sites like rover.com, whether or not they should be considered pet animal care facilities and be taxed as such. The legislature is going to have a lot of fights in the coming years about disruptive industries, about the gig economy, about how to regulate it versus full-time companies in this. This is just a peek under the curtain of what's to come, but it's become a pretty big brouhaha in the legislature this year.
Well, I figure once we find a solution for this, we can start applying that to other industries as this comes about.
That is very practical. You clearly don't follow the legislature.
Obviously.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna jump in. We're gonna go with the big one, 181.
Yeah, Senate Bill 181. It is likely to become law. In fact, I think it's a no-brainer. It will become law. It's just a question what amendments, what form it's going in. Oil and gas companies say that this bill is going to have a major negative impact on the industry. And what the bill does is it does two things. It does a lot of things, but the two biggest things it does is it rewrites the mission of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which now regulates and promotes the industry. This takes promotion of the industry out of their mantra here and puts public health and safety as the number one thing that the commissioners must consider when they are looking at whether to approve a permit for drilling. And when we're talking about permits for drilling, just to put in perspective, there's about 6,500 of them in backup right now that the commission is looking at. So this could affect an awful lot of permits. The second thing it does, it allows local governments to have authority over oil and gas drilling or in any way that affects the public health, safety, and welfare, water, or land around them. Those are very broad categories. And oil and gas companies really say, look, it's not the bill that we're worried about. It's the interpretation of the bill by, a Boulder County or a Broomfield County or an Adams County or a county that has shown more resistance to drilling near households than there is today. Now, of course, the proponents are saying, look, that's the problem. Drilling is getting too close to households. Just look at the home that exploded in Firestone 2 years ago. Just look at the problems that we're seeing when schools and neighborhoods bump up against drilling wells, and what could we see? This is not going to end with any sort of kumbaya moment, and we've already seen petitions put in to basically throw out a law that hasn't been passed yet and to rewrite the way that we oversee oil and gas in a more oil and gas friendly way. I think eventually this will be settled at the ballot and the courtroom and some combination thereof. But it's really testing this state as to, where do we come down in the fights between a $32 billion industry and people who are worried about health and safety. And what has become apparent in this fight is that it seems like there's no middle ground between those two.
I know, which is sad, and there's not a lot of middle ground that we can look at with oil and gas anyway in Colorado. It is the biggest moneymaker here. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully voters vote no. We are proponents for voting no.
That's Alex, not me.
Yes.
Yes. So.
Colorado Business Roundtable, not Denver Business Journal. Thank you so much, Ed. We will see you next month. And again, look out for Capital Business Preview. It comes out every Monday at Denver Business Journal.